What I'm going to do in this video is talk about what it takes to go to Thailand from Sydney, Australia, as of right now. Now, I can't speak for any other country. Obviously, I'm in Sydney. This is Sydney, Australia. And the process to go, you may say, oh, you're not banned from going to Thailand, you can go to Thailand, but this process is almost impossible. I can't say it's impossible, but it seems to be in the real world. If you want to stay in the real world, it seems almost impossible. This continues my series of videos about COVID. I've got 3 videos on my Facebook group. Go to Thailand Watch, my Facebook group. It's a closed group, private group. I've got news about Thailand there, and I've got a few videos about COVID. I don't want this video to be banned, so I won't say anything about COVID, okay? But the first video that's still, as far as the last time I checked, it's still on the Facebook group, was banned by YouTube. Within 5 minutes it was banned, okay? But I'm not going there, okay? So I've got a few videos where I lay down the truth about COVID, but this video is about travelling to Thailand. Of course, I've got a link to Thailand because I've got family in Thailand that I haven't seen since January 2021. January 2021. Now, I was lucky I went to Thailand when I did. That was January 2020. Sorry, did I say 2021? 2020. Okay, January 2020. More than a year ago was when I went to Thailand the last time. Luckily, that was just before COVID started. When I came back to Sydney, that's when all hell broke loose, and I haven't seen my family, my young daughter, since January 2020. Okay, so as of now, to go to Thailand, this is what you have to do. There's a 14-day quarantine when you get to Thailand. A 14-day quarantine. There's a 14-day quarantine when you get back to Sydney. Okay, there's 28 days quarantine. Now you tell me whether that's possible for starters, because unless you're an old retired person or you're taking long service leave or something, most normal holidays are going to be 2, 3 or 4 weeks. 28 days quarantine, that's a whole sort of conventional holidays taken up. That means it's impossible. You tell me how it's possible with a 28-day quarantine period. Okay, 14 days in Bangkok and 14 days coming back to Sydney. Every time that I've gone to Thailand, I've gone for, I've taken 4 weeks off. The last time I went in January 2020 was 2 weeks. Okay, and that's because I started a new job and I didn't have much leave up my sleeve. Okay, a lot of people take 2-3 weeks holidays. A 4-week holiday is taken up by 28 days quarantine. That's impossible from the start. Okay, but let's move on. So you have to go to the Thai consulate website in Sydney. And what you need is a certificate of entry to go into Thailand. It's a whole new level of bureaucracy and red tape to go to Thailand, a certificate of entry. And I'm assuming you can at least do this, say the week before or 2 weeks before, you've got time to do this, fair enough. You make your application, the consulate will have, they say within 3 working days they'll process your application for your certificate of entry. It's approved, okay, but once it's approved, there's a lot more to do. So once it's approved, you need to upload evidence, you need to book your flight to Thailand, and by booking your flight, that means buying your airline ticket, which is $1,000 I've got to spend up front to buy my aeroplane ticket to Thailand. To my knowledge, I've never been able to refund my tickets. Now, I stand to be corrected. If you can refund, I'm not too sure, but I thought you couldn't refund your plane tickets. If you can, fine. But I've got to spend $1,000. Most plane tickets to Thailand from Sydney, Australia are probably around $1,200. I'm saying $1,000 average because you can buy some cheap tickets. I think I bought an $800 ticket one time. It depends when you go. If you go off-peak, off-season, you can get cheaper tickets. So let's say $1,000. It's normally going to be $1,200. Okay. So you have to book your ticket, which is obviously buying your ticket, $1,000 thereabouts. Then you have to book your what they call the alternative state quarantine, ASQ. I've got no idea what that is. I assume you have to book a quarantine back in Bangkok. I'm not sure if you have to pay for your hotel when you go to Bangkok. I'm not sure about that. I assume you have to. You have to book some sort of a alternative state quarantine. You have to book that somehow. Not sure how. You have to probably book a hotel in Bangkok for 14 days. That's a whole nother massive cost. 14 days for a hotel in Bangkok, that won't be cheap. Because every time that I've gone to Thailand, I've normally had family and friends and so forth, so I've never had to buy or pay for too much of a hotel in Thailand. So assuming you have to book 14 days of a hotel, that's a whole nother cost that you have to go through. Okay, so you need your plane ticket and your quarantine. How quarantine works back in Sydney, I'm not too sure. Whether that's automatic, whether I have to book that, whether that's booked as part of this process, I'm not too sure. And whether I have to pay for the 14 days quarantine in Sydney, which is going to be even more expensive, I'm not sure. So that's a whole nother massive level of cost and red tape and paperwork I've got to go through. So then you've got to upload your flight tickets and your quarantine to the Thai consulate in Sydney. They promise 3-day turnaround. Okay. Then they issue your certificate of entry to get to Thailand. Now, the final step is the final step. You need a medical certificate to show a negative COVID-19 test within 72 hours before leaving, before your flight. Okay? That's where the fun begins, the real fun. I assume you don't have to load that medical certificate to the Thai consulate. I assume they're going to give you your certificate of entry to Thailand, and you just need your certificate, your medical certificate, which you show in Thailand. Okay? I assume you need to show a paper certificate, so I'll get to that, the idea of printing out a medical certificate. I'll get to that in a moment, but I assume you can't show like an email. If they email it to you, you can't show it. You need to print out your medical certificate. Okay, so that's the final step. So within 72 hours before travelling, let's say my scenario is Friday 10 a.m. My flight leaves Sydney 10 a.m. on Friday morning. I've got my 4 weeks holidays booked, all approved by work as well. Don't forget, I've got to get this approved by work, your leave approved. I've spent $1,000 for my plane ticket. I've booked my 14 days quarantine in hotels in Bangkok, which is a whole nother load of money I've got to spend and so forth. And then now the stopwatch begins, the countdown begins. 72 hours before my flight is, say, 10 o'clock Tuesday morning. So now, let's think about this for a moment in the real world. I've got no idea where you get a COVID test from in Sydney. I assume I've got to go somewhere in Sydney for the test. A hospital somewhere. So that's going to be at least half a day to get a COVID-19 test in Sydney. Don't forget, this is 3 days before my real holidays begins on Friday. I may have to take at least half a day off work before my 4 weeks holiday starts. So think about that for a moment. Unless the medical centre down the road can give me the test, I'm not sure. Maybe they can. So that's going to save time if I can walk down to the medical centre. But I may have to travel somewhere on public transport to get to a test in somewhere that tests in Sydney. Then I have to assume, fingers crossed, I get a negative test. I bet I'm going to test positive. Who knows about the test result? Let's assume I test negative, because you may not know it, but because I won't tell you, but a huge percentage of the world's population already has coronavirus antibodies in their body. Why? Because coronavirus has been around forever and it's the common cold. You may not know that because I won't tell you amongst all this BS. Okay, so let's assume I get a negative COVID test. Let's assume I can get the certificate within... now you can see how doing that on the Tuesday is going to push it. Let's assume I can get somewhere to do a test. I've heard stories of people waiting, or you know what it's like when you go to hospitals or medical centres? You've got to wait for hours for doctors, for tests. I've heard of people waiting all day for a test and a vaccination, and they have to just leave and go home. So let's assume I can do that by the close of business on Tuesday. If not, it's going to go into Wednesday. Who knows about that? Then if they work after hours, I've got to stay back at night time. Of course, I've got to go to work the next day and so forth. So let's, fingers crossed, I can get a negative test by the Tuesday. If not, it's going to go into Wednesday. Don't forget, the countdown has now started to my 10 o'clock flight leaving on Friday. The Friday morning, I'm not going to do this on Friday morning, don't forget. I'm going to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go through buses and trains to get to the airport. I'm not doing this on Friday morning. I have to get somehow a certificate by the Thursday, by close of business Thursday, which I then have to print out somewhere. Luckily, I can walk to my work and use a printer. If you've got a printer and a computer at home, good luck to you. But for someone, if you don't have a printer, you then have to find somewhere to print out the certificate by close of business on Thursday. Hope you can do that by Thursday, because Friday is going to be going to the airport. Okay, this video's been too long. You can see now that it's almost becoming impossible. I'd love to hear from someone who's done this. Someone who's done this from Sydney, Australia. If you've been through the process, I'd love to hear from you, but it's almost sounding like an impossible process to get a certificate of entry, to get a negative COVID test, all by the time my flight leaves on the Friday 10 o'clock. That's the process you have to go through. Then you've got 28 days quarantine, which almost makes it impossible. It's almost impossible. There it is. That's the process. It sounds impossible to me. What do you think? I'll leave it at that.